Welcome to the Market Recap, your weekly digest of the biggest market stories from the past week. Join host Anna Serin and financial expert Bruce Campbell as they go beyond the headlines to deliver cutting-edge insights into news that move the market. Proudly presented by the Canadian Securities Exchange.
Hi, my name's Anna Serin, and I'm Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange. You're joining us for yet another market recap on Friday, March 11th, 2022. I'm, of course, joined by my wonderful co-host, Bruce Campbell with Stonecastle Investment Management. Thank you for joining me, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a few weeks, so it's good to be back.
It's nice to see you. There's obviously lots going on in the market, so we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk today about the CPI headline, which is a consumer price index. We're going to talk about the nickel market. It was huge what happened this week. We're going to break down what happened and explain what that means. We're going to talk about a bear market bounce, which occurred on Wednesday. And then, of course, we'll get into some CSE issuer news, some big stuff happening on the CSE. So first, let's talk about the CPI. That is the Consumer Price Index. It measures the weighted average of prices of a basket of consumer goods and services. So that's what that means. What happened?
Well, this is what's commonly referred to as the inflation number, something that we've all been super hyper focused on in the last few months. Hard to ignore it, especially when you drive by the gas pump these days. You can see how everything's been going up in price, and gas is certainly one of those big inputs. And what we saw, if you look at the graph that we have here, or the chart here, it's showing us, how high and how fast that the CPI inflation number has gone up. And we just saw a print for last month of 7.9% annualized. And you can take us, you have to go back into the 70s and 80s to see higher numbers. And at that point in time, it was significantly higher, but you can see the rate of change is quite dramatic here. And so, it has a lot of people concerned about, are we going back to the way it was in the 80s? What does that mean? How does the central bank control that? So, of course, that's on everyone's mind. From what the data we've been looking at, if you look at kind of the year over year numbers, we think that those inflation numbers could continue on for, maybe a month or two more before they start to subside. And, at the same time, the central bank and the Federal Reserve and, some of the other central banks around the world are already starting to take action to try to control inflation and, just slow it down a little bit from where it is.
For those of you that maybe weren't around and aware at the time in the early 80s or perhaps mid, mortgage rates were as high as 18%, which is pretty scary stuff. So obviously the government has a lot to do to try and avoid that from happening and keep things at bay. Let's talk about the nickel market. So I'm going to break down a little bit what's going to happen or what happened this week, and then you're going to tell us why it happened and what to expect. So our viewer should hopefully know and understand short squeezing a little bit, because we talked about it a lot last year with AMC and GameStop. But essentially what happened is nickel prices, they went nuclear on Tuesdays. They soared over 100% over their price in one day. This shut down the London Metal Exchange and forced them to step a halt on their trading for a few days, I think. And obviously this has to do with Russia invading Ukraine. But then because it spiked so high, this forced an immense short squeeze. So for those of you that remember us talking about short squeezing with AMC and GameStop, this is a bit of a bigger deal and a bit of a bigger short squeeze. Explain to us what happened and what to expect from there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this has to do, again, like you said, with the Russia-Ukraine invasion that Russia did and all the sanctions that have been imposed. Russia is one of the world's largest nickel producers, and now the world won't have access to that. So, as a result, you started to see the price of nickel move up. And then, just as you mentioned, these short squeezes happen when people who are short nickel and they were anticipating nickel going lower, and as a result, they would sell it high and buy it lower and make their profit that way. Instead, the price of nickel started to rise because the sanctions on Russia, and they were forced to buy back in. And as the price goes up, you can see that it went almost vertical as far as the move goes, which caused the London Metals Exchange to halt trading. They reversed some trades. There's kind of lots of rumors out there about different hedge funds that are short and what damage that could have. And so you don't very often see the price of a commodity double in such a short period of time, and then the metals exchange shut down trading, roll back some of the trades, and then have no trading for a few days. So it's one of those things we don't see very often, but it just shows you the volatility that we're seeing right now in the markets and in the world, as far as not just stocks, but in this case, commodities as well.
So just to point out on this, I mean, normally this is a chart as if you were going long on a stock. This is a chart that you'd love to see, right, Bruce? But what happens with the shorting is that if somebody sold it at, let's say, $50 and it moves up to 100, that's actually a huge loss for that holder because they had to compensate for that. So going up, there's a lot of people that lost a lot of money on the way up there. It wasn't necessarily a good thing for the market as well. This is obviously going to affect nickel and the production of nickel and access to it, right?
It certainly will have a bearing on that. And, it's one of those things that they can't just turn on instant supply. It takes time to bring up mines and even to increase the production of an existing mine. So it's one of those concerns on why inflation could be higher longer.
And do you, I talked a little bit about this with Jordan last week. Do you think that we're going to see more of this? I mean, not necessarily that, but are we going to see commodities, affected by what's happening in Ukraine right now more and more?
Yeah, I mean, we already have, right? I mean, you look at the oil market, it's had, there's probably a $10 to $15 premium priced into it because of what's happening right now over and above supply and demand. You look at the gold market, it's had a big move just because of risk and people flight to safety. The nickel market, it's been affected. There's multiple different commodities that are affected directly because of the sanctions against Russia.
Crazy. Well, my thoughts are out with all those in Ukraine right now, and hopefully things settle down in the near future. We saw a bear market bounce on Wednesday. This is not child's play, bear market bounce. What happened?
Well, we've talked a lot about in the last, several shows over the last few months about sort of the dynamic of the market changing and, what's happened. And if you look at especially in the US indices, we're really in a bear market, which is described or defined as that, it's sort of 20% drop from the high. And if you look at the NASDAQ, the Russell, even the S&P is, got into, sort of definitely correction territory, maybe bear market territory, but, sort of to step back and look at what the bear market is, not necessarily from the 20% drop that, kind of that 20% that everyone likes to use, but more just the feel of the market and the risk appetite for the market. You can see that that's changed quite dramatically. There's been a lot of, headlines, and those headlines can move the market dramatically one way or the other. And this week is exactly what we saw. So, we saw a fairly big sell-off on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, we saw this big move. Most of it happened overnight. We didn't see a lot of movement during the day, but we saw this big up move. And you can see that on the chart. It's right in the middle where it goes, effectively straight up. And it went sideways for a lot of the trading day, didn't really gain a lot of ground. And then, yesterday and today we've seen, things back off a bit again. And that's indicative of the markets. They see there's these big up rallies and people can get excited about like, oh, here we go. Here's the start of, the next uptrend. But in reality, it's a lot of short covering that drives these rallies. And, from some of the data that we heard about, it sounds like there was quite a bit of liquidation the day before, which would make sense. People were probably both selling long positions and also shorting some positions, and then that creates the short squeeze the next day.
Crazy stuff, Bruce. Okay, we're going to get into some CSE issuer news. Another great issuer story on the CSE is we saw Albert Labs commence trading on the CSE this week. After doing a $4.7 million financing, they came to trade with us. Albert Labs is research and development, and their focus is providing psilocybin for cancer treatment to initially start, and then they'll branch out from there. And it has to do with, I think, cancer treatment in anxiety and mental health, and then continue to build out from there. Do you think we're just going to continue to see more and more of these companies? I do love to see public companies come to market that have a focus on mental health. It really makes me happy and give investors the opportunity to invest in these things. We're starting to see younger investors want to invest in, these types of projects that are coming to market. We haven't talked about psychedelics in a little while. Are we going to see more this year, Bruce, do you think?
I certainly would think so. There's been such a focus on physical health for a long time, with the pandemic, there's been more and more evidence that we've all been mentally impaired in some capacity. So I suspect that, there's going to be more companies that focus on that, both from a short term, what just happened, but even a longer term. There's, more compounds, more studies, more data on, the importance of mental health.
Absolutely. Okay, look, Bruce, what should we think about going into next week? I know that it's interesting times and it changes daily, but what are some considerations going into the market next week?
Well, I think really the biggest events, that's scheduled right now will be the Fed, and they're supposed to meet on Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they'll have a decision on what they're doing with interest rates on Wednesday. The anticipation is that they're going to go at least 25 basis points on Wednesday, but there's some speculation that could be as high as 50. And going over the next year, the thought is that they're going to raise rates 6 times, over the next year to get us to, sort of that 1.5% to 2% range, depending on how many times they raise and how much they raise each time. So that's going to be the big focus that's on the calendar. And of course, it's the market. So there's always the unknowns that we don't know about that, will show up. And I'm sure that, probably has to do with the commodity markets and Russia.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Bruce. I also want to say we did also celebrate International Women's Day this week. The CSE has put together a few podcasts. They're excellent podcasts. You can check them out on CSE TV. I think we might have another 1 or 2 coming out this month, so make sure you check it out. Thank you again, Bruce, for everything, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, have a great weekend.
You too.